I was telling Marilyn that it's especially sweet for me to follow Rebecca Parker's words because I was her administrative assistant for so many years. Sorry, it's taking me a little longer to get settled than I normally do. Okay. Hello. It's nice to be with you all. Brene Brown is a podcaster, author, and professor who espouses the benefits of vulnerability in leadership. Although her research and the grounded theories that evolve from the data are geared mostly towards business leadership, I have found her work to be pertinent to religious leadership too. She has a new book out entitled Strong Ground, which looks at what leaders need to do if they want to win, as opposed to just not lose. The concept of playing to win versus playing not to lose comes from A.G. Lafley, an American businessman, who states that playing to win focuses opportunities on, who states that playing to win focuses on opportunities and growth by envisioning desired outcomes, taking calculated risks, and making decisions decisively. This approach tends to motivate people. Playing not to lose is typically motivated by fear and employs strategies such as avoiding negative outcomes, analyzing decisions to the point of hesitation, and prioritizing safety, predictability, and preservation of what currently is. It also tends to suck the joy out of whatever you're talking about. I've participated in lots of church boards that have been stuck in a game of trying not to lose. And I often wonder if our U.S. Congress is stuck in the same game. I think it's worth our while to look at some of the strategies Brene Brown suggests we engage to win. Now, the book is chock-a-block full of strategies that empower the mindsets needed to pursue the win, so I recommend it and her podcasts to you. I think the read is a worthy investment since she uses grounded theory research. And what that means is that the strategies that she conveys come out of data of what actually is. So it's kind of like the ideas are already field tested. I heard about this first strategy I want to tell you about on a podcast where Dr. Brown was engaging questions from her listeners about the book itself. Somebody asked her, what one mindset shift do you think that leaders often overlook when facing complex challenges? And to illustrate her answer, she started with this quote: "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." I'm going to repeat that. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. This quote indirectly mandates that we recognize both the stimulus and the response, and we have to explore what limits or broadens the space so that we have the opportunity to choose our own response. And it is in our best interest to also explore our relationship to these factors. Let's take an example. I don't know about you, but I need examples. My husband says to me, "This dish is too salty." And to make it a little more interesting, let's say that it's a brand new recipe and I've been working on it all afternoon. Now, if I don't recognize that his statement is a stimulus and the things I'm now thinking that are frankly dying to jump out of my mouth are a response, I may not recognize that I have a choice in how I respond. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say after being called to account for something they said, "I couldn't help it"? I'm guessing that person didn't recognize these variables. So if I don't utilize the space between his statement and my response, my initial reaction might in itself be rather salty. I might say something like, "So don't eat it." However, if I recognize that this is a moment when having space between his statement and my reaction could be helpful, I might employ one of several different strategies to make that space a little bit bigger so I have more time to consider my response. I could take a breath. I could very intentionally finish chewing my last bite and lay down my fork. I could take a drink of water. And understanding my relationship to both the stimulus and the response may impact how I want to take that space. For example, I may need to take a drink of water instead of taking a breath, so my mouth will be full and I can't say what I'm thinking until I have a chance to consider my options. Having created the space, I can now employ one of several strategies to determine the best way to move. I could work on controlling my snarkiness. I could use the pause. I mean, after all, the pause may send a message, albeit passively, to my beloved. That statement didn't feel good. Or I could actively share with him how this made me feel, simply by saying something like, "Ouch, Jeffrey." But maybe I want to consider how my values should impact the situation. Like, I'm committed to being curious about what other people say, so maybe I need to hear them out. Or maybe I want to consider what I know to be true. Like, I know that my husband loves me and he would never actively wish to hurt me. So maybe I should give him the benefit of the doubt that he's just simply making conversation and let it go. Doing these things allows me to have a more measured response, which can keep my behavior more fully in line with who I want to be. And as you can imagine, the more complex the situation, the more consequential the choice you make. Or said another way, the more freedom and growth you may encounter. Okay, here's another Brene Brown strategy I found helpful, and I think it deepens and broadens what we just talked about. This is the concept of near and far enemies. It comes from a Buddhist precept, typically applied to the four immeasurables. Brene Brown uses the concept in relation to values, and I think she does it to good effect. If you believe that generosity is a value that you should work to embody, you naturally would work against the far enemy, which is just the opposite. In this case, it could be stinginess or selfishness. Most of us can handle that, right? However, there is a near enemy that we don't always consider, but we should guard against it because it masquerades actually as your value, but it's actually kind of fighting against it. So in this example, the near enemy of generosity may be self-sacrifice or even martyrdom. Now, as you think about this, you might think, no, wait a minute. Generosity often requires a little bit of self-sacrifice, doesn't it? But it doesn't really. If you consider the definition of generosity, which is giving of yourself without any expectations of anything in return, and then you consider the definition of self-sacrifice, the giving up of one's own interests or wishes in order to help others and advance a cause, there's an expectation in self-sacrifice that others will be helped or that the cause is going to be advanced. And if I'm honest with myself about how each concept kind of feels in my body, I'm also aware for me that I often have a small, subtle expectation that if I'm self-sacrificing, people are going to notice. And I might even sometimes want to be appreciated for that sacrifice. So you can see how this near enemy, the concept of self-sacrifice, actually kind of fights against the concept of generosity. Okay, so let's go back to my husband telling me my dish was salty, and let's assume that in the space I created by taking a sip of water, I remember that my value is curiosity, and now I know for me the far enemy of curiosity is disinterest, like I don't care what he has to say. Well, clearly that's not in play, because I wouldn't be triggered if it was. So let's consider the near enemy to curiosity to see what I have to sidestep with that. The near enemy might be attachment. I'm curious about his opinion as long as it's one I like, right? But if I'm going to embody curiosity in that moment, I not only have to stay interested in what he has to say, but also I have to muster up in myself the real desire to know more about the saltiness of the dish. If I can really be true to the concept of curiosity and not get sidetracked by my attachment to wanting to like what he says, my sweetheart may in fact help me to discover that I used salted butter and I salted the dish. Not only have we avoided a fight, but I learned something to boot. Okay, here's the third strategy to win the game. As I said at the top, Dr. Brown talks about vulnerability, courage, and empathy as key concepts needed to be effective leaders. In another podcast, she talked about how, because as human beings, we can't always be vulnerable, courageous, and empathetic, we have to, quote, build systems that are braver than people. She says James Clear says it another way. He states, quote, we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. I really like that. We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So to unpack that, let's consider this church's mission statement. I think Diane read a little bit of this at the beginning. The church website states, Starr King Unitarian Universalist Church is a welcoming congregation that strives to foster respect and compassion for all people and a reverence for nature. We support one another in our search for spiritual and religious meaning and are committed to working for justice in the larger community. These are laudable goals. But what happens in a scenario like this? Let's pretend that I'm a member of this church and I'm serving on the board. And I show up to a board meeting running in the door just before the chalice is lit. I'm tired because my kiddo kept me up half the night with a toothache. And on top of that, I've tried to counteract the sleepiness, so I'm overcaffeinated and underhydrated. And to boot, because I was late getting here, I haven't had my most current meal. Now, I don't know about you, but given those circumstances, I might have a hard time finding my ability to foster respect and compassion, or to support you in your search for spiritual meaning, let alone work for justice in a board meeting. But let's pretend for a minute that once upon a time, a very wise version of our board recognized that we would need systems hardwired into the board meetings to help us in these moments when our best selves had stepped out of the room. Let's pretend that this wise board put these two steps into place. First, we take a moment of silence at the beginning to allow our emotions, our spirits, our bodies, and our minds to all land together. And second, we have a check-in at the beginning of our time together so that we know what each of us is walking in the door with. These systems allow us to be human and fall down. And these systems provide space so that somebody might be able to say, wow, Becky, that sounds like a really hard day. Do you need a minute? Or somebody else might be able to say, I have this bad habit of skipping lunch, and so I carry these peanut butter crackers in my purse. Would you like these today? Putting in these structures might better enable me as an individual to meet my values even on the worst day. Dr. Brown and her guest go on to talk about how some concepts require not only individual work, like the work you do to become your best self, but also collective work. Dr. Brown says, quote, "I do believe that skills building happens in relationship. I don't think you move from knowing something to integrating it and becoming it without relationship. That's why communities like this church are so important, because we believe in our individual ability to become better people, and then we challenge each other, and we encourage each other, and then we celebrate each other when we do become better people. That challenge, that encouragement, that celebration, it's part of the process. So, if we take these strategies, separating stimulus and response and using the space to become more adept in how we respond to one another, and using the concept of near and far enemies, I did that backwards, near and far enemies, with our values so that we become a little more self-aware, and in our church and in our communities, we consider hardwiring our values into structures that ensure the behaviors associated with those values can be acted rather than relying on each of us to be resourced enough to do it all the time. We're more likely to show up grounded, and thus better balanced to take on all the uncertainty that is readily available in the world right now. We're more likely to win at the game of life. Close your eyes for just a minute. Really see it. See it in yourself and in this church. Really see yourselves learning together. Really see being intentional and thoughtful about how you respond to each other. Really see using strategies to call out our best selves. And now notice how being grounded in our values ripples out into the wider community, into the state, into our country, into the world all around us. That process, that commitment, that dedication, that gives me hope. May it be so.